Hello everyone, thank you for coming along to my talk today. I'm going to be talking to you about some of the tools that we can use to make the most of our autosomal DNA test results. Now, one thing I should say before we start this talk, this is a more advanced talk, and if you haven't already taken a DNA test and you aren't familiar with all the different tools at the different testing companies, you probably won't get so much out of this talk. Now, if you are thinking of using any third-party tools, I think the first thing to say is that you should make sure that you are very familiar with the existing tools at the company websites. And you need to be very used to the system of, for example, using the coloured dots at Ancestry to cluster your matches, and familiar with all the different testing companies and how those results work. And if you have tested at Ancestry DNA, which most people start off with, you can transfer your results to the other testing companies, and you just pay a small fee to access some of the extra features. Now, the first thing that you are likely to need if you are going to be using your data with some of the third-party tools is to download your raw data. And if you have uploaded your results to the other testing sites, this is something you'll already be familiar with. And when you do get the data, you will find that you get this text file with a list of all the positions that have been tested in your genome and what the DNA letter is for those positions. So that is the file that you will generally have to upload to most of these third-party websites to make more out of your raw data. Now, this is actually a very personal selection of tools that I'm talking about today, and I'm really focusing on the ones that I found the most interesting and useful, and I'm focusing particularly on the features within those tools that I found the most useful. There's actually a very, very wide range of tools available, and one thing to remember is that these tools do tend to come and go, they change very quickly, and also because they are using data from the testing companies can sometimes pose restrictions on what other companies can do with that data. So what I talk about now may not necessarily apply in a year or 2 years' time. Now, the first tool I want to talk about is DNA Painter, which is by far and away my favourite tool. And this is a free website, but you will need a subscription if you want to access some of the additional features, or if you want to have more than one account there. And I'm going to run through some of the tools that you can use there and explain how they work. Now, the first tool is it allows you to visualise your family tree. Genetic genealogy involves just as much looking at your family tree research as it does interpreting the DNA results. You can, if you've got a GEDCOM file from your family tree program, you can easily upload that, and it will extract the data for your direct ancestral line. And then you can do all sorts of visualizations to help with your understanding of your DNA test results. So you will get a chart like this, a nice colourful chart showing your direct line. And there's a whole range of DNA filters that you can use. So one of the most useful ones is you can look at which is your mitochondrial DNA line, which is the mother and so on, going back for many generations. You can look at your X DNA inheritance pattern. Now, the X chromosome is included in in all of the companies' raw data, but not all of the companies actually report those results. So you can use third-party tools to do that sort of analysis. So it's very useful to be able to see which ancestral lines you're looking at for that X DNA inheritance. And you can also, on DNA Painter, have a genetic ancestors chart. So if you are, this allows you to track your research, so that if you think that your matches are sufficient to have confirmed a particular line, you can then edit that person and then add a little DNA icon to show that those lines have been confirmed through DNA testing. And I've still got some way to go on one of my lines, or two of my lines, in fact, where we've got an illegitimate ancestor, which I haven't yet been able to identify. But I think I'm getting very close now through some of my DNA matches. And another consideration when interpreting DNA results is how complete your DNA, your genealogical tree is, and also how complete the tree is of your matches. And there's a very useful tool at DNA Painter which allows you to look at tree completeness. And it can be rather depressing actually when you see how much research you've done and you discover that you've still got many, many gaps in your family tree. But of course, one of the issues with autosomal DNA is that, especially once we get to the very small matches, we could be matching someone as a 5th cousin or perhaps even as a 10th cousin. And our pedigrees all tend to collapse on each other so that the same ancestors appear multiple times in our family tree. So you can't necessarily be sure that the match that you've identified in your tree is actually the person who is the ancestor who is contributing that DNA. So on this report, you can also look at the pedigree collapse in your tree. And this is my pedigree collapse. I've still got many, many gaps in my tree. And in my case, this all occurs in Devon in the early 1600s. That's probably not going to affect any of my DNA matches because we can't really use autosomal DNA going back that far. But it's a useful check, particularly if you've got more recent pedigree collapse, to help you to adjust your interpretation of your results to take that into account. Now, the second tool at DNA Painter that I want to look at is the tool, it's called the Shared CM tool, which helps you to figure out how you're related to your matches. Now, at Ancestry DNA, you're probably already familiar with the tool that you can use when you click on the percentage of shared DNA and the total CM shared. That brings up a table showing the probability of different types of relationships. In this case, it's someone who I think is my 2nd cousin, and it shows when we share 1 and 1, 2 centimorgans, these are the most likely relationships. And you can see that 2nd cousin is a 26% chance of being related at that level. But of course, when you look at results at the other testing companies, you don't have these charts to look at. And also it's useful to have other databases to look at to check the veracity of those results. And this is where the Shared CM tool comes in. So there's a number of ways we can use this for checking our data. And the first thing is that we can call up statistics from what's called the Shared CM project. And this is a citizen science project led by Blaine Bettinger, where rather than using probabilities, which is what Ancestry was doing based on computer simulations, Blaine is collecting real-life data from people who have taken DNA tests, and they've confirmed relationships with different relations at different degrees of relationship. So you can enter the amount of DNA shared, so in this case it's 112 centimorgans, and when you click on the button, this chart here, it blanks out the relationships that aren't possible, and it shows you the ones that are within the possible range. And one of the newer features of this tool is that when you click on the relationship that you think it is, you can then call up one of these histograms. And this allows you to look at all the data that's been submitted by people for relationships of that range. And my 112 centimorgans, 2nd cousin relationship, you can see that it's actually quite a low match for that relationship. And in fact, this is also within the range of a half a 2nd cousin as well. We can also look at the probabilities on the DNA Painter website. And there are 2 different ways of looking at this. Now, the probabilities are actually derived from Ancestry's statistics. Ancestry published a white paper when they first started to revise their matching, and these statistics were extrapolated from that white paper. But they actually had 2 different sets of statistics. So these are the original ones, and you can see here that my 2nd cousin, the probability there is only 9%. Ancestry updated their probabilities a while back, and now on the DNA Painter website you can actually see 2 different versions of these probabilities, and these are the updated ones which correspond more closely with the results that you actually see on Ancestry. Although here there's a slight discrepancy, so for the same amount, 112 centimorgans, it actually shows 24%, whereas on the Ancestry website it shows 26%. So it was actually not possible to, Ancestry published a white paper when they published the first set of probabilities and it was easy to extract the data, but for the second batch there's been nothing published. So this is really, been crowdsourced data where they've tried to collect the data for the different relationship ranges. So you can see that it's not an exact science trying to estimate these relationships, but it's helpful to look at lots of different sources in order to inform your conclusion. And based just on this one test result, I've still got, there's still a possibility this could be a half second cousin relationship rather than the relationship we think it is. Which is why it's always helpful to have data from additional people, additional relatives. So I've tested my parents, and when I do a comparison with the same match and my father, then my father shares 539 centimorgans with this match. And when we look at the relationships here, the relationship with my father would be that of first cousin once removed, and that falls solidly within that range on the old probabilities. And when we look at the new probabilities, again, it's that first cousin once removed relationship falls well within that range. And you can see right at the bottom there's a very, very low chance that this could still be a half first cousin once removed relationship, but that seems very unlikely. So the more data you have from other relatives to compare with each match, the firmer your conclusions are likely to be about any relationship.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. To watch the extended uninterrupted version, go to familyhistory.tv, link in the description. You will also find a host of talks from other experts on a variety of subjects. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when these videos become available.